Also, because I wanted to ask you about that, because there's a whole lot of kind of double standards which is being raised, that you now have sanctions against Russia, but the European Union is 40% dependent on Russian energy, and despite the sanctions, they've still kind of ring-fenced that. So they still are importing energy from Russia, and also Russia and Ukraine provide close to anywhere between 40 to 60% of wheat and cooking oil and so on and so forth. So can you really, either for economic reasons or because you don't like a particular regime, can you really de-link, given that you are so dependent?
Well, it's hard. It's hard because we are integrated. Globalization has integrated economies. So, in a sense, somewhat paradoxically, these weapons you use of trade, investment cutoffs, payment cutoffs, they work only because the other countries linked you, because of globalization.
Right.
But because the weapon you use is causing so much pain, the other side is going to think, well, does it make sense for me to be so globalized? Should I back off from globalization? Should I be dependent on the other country either for inputs to my supply chain or as a final consumer of my products? So it is going to cause a lot of angst. I think the weapons are working, but even, as you said, the European Union sees energy as a big part of what Russia supplies, so let's try and stay away from that.
Right.
But in the process of levying sanctions, what happens is there are spillover effects.
You're hurting yourselves as well.
Exactly, because the oil companies say, well, they're applying sanctions on Russia. Do I still want to buy Russian oil? Maybe, 6 months down the line, it becomes really problematic. So let me stop buying at this point. So, companies like Shell, etc., are staying away and have been actually pushed into staying away, even though the sanctions don't cover oil. And so it causes disruption. And of course, the price of natural gas in Europe has shot through the roof.
Right. But also I wanted to ask you that in terms of actual concrete impact, because one argument is that this is not the end of globalization, this is the end of globalization for Russia.
Right.
Because Russia is becoming increasingly isolated, everyone's cut off ties.
Right.
How badly do you think this is already hurting Russia, could hurt Russia down the line, and also how badly is it going to hurt the world economy as a whole?
Right. First on Russia.
First on Russia, yes.
Look, part of the reason we are applying these sanctions is because the global governance system no longer works. Russia has vetoed everything at the UN, so you don't have a UN sort of sanction on what Russia did.
Correct.
And so, this is a alternative way of punishing a unwarranted assault on a neighboring country, right? So in that sense, it's an attempt to maintain the global order through new weapons, because the old weapons have been, in fact, military weapons have been rendered sort of unusable.
Sure,
because
and diplomacy
of the
and all
paralysis of the UN. But that said, going forward, first, the damage for Russia is going to be substantial economically. I don't think they bargained for sanctions, for example, on their central bank. They didn't see the large-scale sanctions on everything, including the spillovers from even sanctions on energy.
Right.
They thought that would be sort of
left alone.
Left alone, but it is starting to hurt them. So